keep on moving forward, always getting closer. I march until it's over. And just
All right, so I'm here with Matt Presser. Little known fact about Matt Presser, he's a sergeant at the San Benito Sheriff's Office. Got into the same career I did. But we grew up riding dirt bikes together, and he actually mechanicked for a few well-known people in the sport. Casey Hinson, Daniel Blair, and Ryan Dungey. And he was with Ryan Dungey up until the point he got the Factory Suzuki ride. So, First off, Matt, tell us a little about yourself, how you got into dirt bikes and wrenching.
Yeah, well, growing up, I always liked dirt bikes. It was always my thing. It wasn't until me and you met in our freshman year of high school that I really got serious about riding dirt bikes. Did a lot of time, at the races with you while you were coming up from novice, intermediate, and then pro. Learned a lot from your dad. Taught me the ropes on a lot of the little stuff to do at the track. Tightening spokes and chain and putting gas and scraping mud and all that stuff. So just did that. After high school, I decided motorcycle mechanics was the thing I was going to do, and I went to MMI. I went through MMI for, a little over a year, I think it was. When I came back, I got hired at a local dirt bike shop here in town and started doing a little bit of work on bikes, not a whole lot. Shortly after that, maybe just a few months, Casey Hinson called me, and I met Casey through you through the years of racing and going to the track and stuff. And he asked, if I wanted to be his mechanic, and at the time, Casey was intermediate, just getting ready to turn pro. So I said, yeah, absolutely. And that was my dream, was to go to the circuit and go around and go to the races. And in our area, Casey was, the fastest intermediate that I can remember at the time. So that was like a no-brainer. And plus we had a little history with him and stuff, but when he used to stay at your house. So, I got hooked up with him. He was on the East Coast. He was staying with Shea Bentley at the time, who was kind of his trainer slash mentor, so to speak, of getting through all the amateur stuff. So I actually went to his house and drove with his parents to and Frank Darnley to Ponca, and that was the first amateur national I had ever been to, was Ponca. Up until that point, it was just local races. Never did much traveling. So I went to Ponca with him, and we had a really good weekend going, and unfortunately he crashed out. And that kind of ruined our weekend pretty quick. He got a concussion, and we were done for the weekend. But he was riding really well. He was top 3 in the amateur class at that time, with a lot of good riders going on. And so we were out of it, and we did a little bit. And I worked for Casey for about a year, all the way up until, it was a little over a year, all the way up until he turned pro. Right after that race at Ponca, he went pro, and he got picked up by the Buku Honda Arena Cross team. The first year Buku Honda had their team, so I got to do, that was the dream for me, was I was working on his bikes. I was traveling the country with the team manager, Nick Spano, at the time, and he was Tiger Lacey's mechanic at the time for that. And then, we were traveling doing that, and it was, Casey ended up Rookie of the Year in the Buku Arena Cross, their first season ever around. He had some excellent results. He did, really well for, kind of just getting into that. And, Josh Demuth ended up winning, and Shane Bess was in there, and Josh Woods and Tiger Lacey, Tommy Hoffmeister, all the big Arena Cross names were in there. And Casey ended up, really finding his groove towards the middle end of the season, and ended up with Rookie of the Year, which was cool. Right after that, we started out for East Coast 250 Lights Supercross as privateers. We had a bike all fully done by Pro Circuit. Shea Bentley was able to, get Casey some good deals on some good parts, and we had a sweet bike, and we drove out to Florida, and we were staying with Shea at the time. And first round was Indianapolis. I think we went to Indianapolis, and that was back before they were timed laps to get into Supercross, and you actually had to qualify for the night show.
Oh yeah, you had to do the races.
Yeah, so you had to do the races. So Casey lines up on his first one and gets a great start, and I think he was running probably like 4th or 5th, and he went off the triple, and somebody had crashed on the backside right in front of him, and he just KO'd him, and it ended up breaking his sternum. So we were out for the night there, and we drove back to Florida. He got his chest x-rayed and stuff, and it looked okay, just bruised. And the next weekend was Daytona, so we went out for Daytona, and he did, I think, 5 laps in practice, and he said his chest was popping, and he was done.
Oh, yeah.
So it turned out he had a broken sternum, and so that was the end of our season for that. From there, I came home. Casey was out for a while, so I was just at home kind of messing around. And that's when Ryan Dungey's dad, Troy, called me and asked if I was looking for a rider. And at the time, I was, yeah, for sure. I had met Ryan and his dad just a couple weeks earlier when we were staying at Michael Young's house down in Southern California. Since they were all answer riders at the time, we were staying with Michael. Michael was super cool enough to let us all crash on couches and all that kind of stuff. And I met Ryan for the week he was out there testing and training. I met Troy there too, and super good people. I mean, I don't think anybody has anything bad to say about them. They're the nicest people ever. And Troy gave me a call and asked if I was looking for a rider, and I said, yeah, sure. At that time, Ryan was intermediate. He was kind of the unknown, unheard of person.
I remember when you called me and you said you got a ride. You're like, hey, I'm going to go wrench for Ryan Dungey. And I had already been racing pro for 7 years at that point, with a little break where I went to the police academy because my arm pump was so bad that I was just over it. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to go wrench for this guy, Ryan Dungey. And I think he told me he won the C class. Was it the C class?
Nah, he had just won Loretta's on the schoolboy. He was on 125.
Yeah, that's what it was. You're like, yeah, he won the 125 schoolboy. And I'm like, yeah, I've never heard of him, you know? And I'm like, whatever. And you're like, dude, he's fast. He's really fast. And I'm like, oh, all right. You know, I'm like, I was thinking to myself, maybe it's just parents with a bunch of money or something, right? That needed I'm like, that wasn't the case. I'm like, this was going to be one of the greatest riders in the sport that you were going to go mechanic for. Yeah. And it was kind of funny because I remember down the road, I was at the first Buku Arena Cross after I went to the police academy, and then I was like, I'm going back racing. I'm like, yeah, real life isn't as fun. Yeah. And so I was like, I was at the first Buku Arena Cross, and I'm like, oh yeah, hey, that's that Ryan Dungey guy. And I'm like, he had just got a Suzuki ride, and I'm like, I'm gonna beat this Ryan Dungey guy. I didn't even make the mains, and I believe he won the main there. And I was like, oh my god, this guy is the real deal. And then everybody knows where Ryan Dungey went with his career, but yeah. So you went from Casey, and I mean, Casey had an awesome Supercross, career. I remember he was making mains that one year when I think he was on was it the Munn racing team that he was on? Yeah,
I don't remember exactly which team he was, but man, for when he was riding that 450 that one year, he was doing really well. And
I mean, I grew up with Casey. He was on a 60, I was on an 80, and then him and I, we stayed together, and we go ride and mess around and goof around all the time, and and that's one thing that I think Casey had a good Supercross career. I did arena cross for a while, had a decent career in that. And then, but like Dungey, I mean, you can talk to Dungey. So you started to work with Dungey, and then you probably saw a little bit of difference in growing up with me and not bagging on Casey or anything. Casey's a fantastic rider, but Dungey has some kind of X factor that not a lot of people have. And like, to you, what was that X factor that you saw with him? Yeah, so I remember when I first met Ryan, staying at Michael Young's house. Michael was the one who was telling me that he was like, oh yeah, this kid's fast, dude. You're gonna see he's winning championships. I was like, I never even heard of him. Yeah. And he was just like, dude, trust me, he's fast. And I was like, sweet. So that week we were down there with Michael's, I just remember all Ryan wanted to do was moto. It was like, different track. It was Paris, it was Elsinore, wherever we can get to. He would just moto. To the point where like one day Michael and Casey they wanted to go out to Beaumont and just free ride for the day, go out and hit jumps and have fun, throw whips, and to try to take the monotony out of training and that kind of thing. And Ryan was, I want a moto, like that's all he cared about. The kid's mindset, kid at the time, I was in my early 20s and he was 16, so his mindset was always just like,
he wanted to get better. It
All
was
business.
all business all the time. He just wanted to get better. And his parents didn't have a ton of money when they were growing up. His dad and Troy and Michelle were both just workaholics. I mean, Troy would pump concrete, sun up to sundown, and then drive us to the races, to Redbud or and we were staying in Minnesota with him at the time. But it was just, he was goofy. Ryan was like the goofy kid, but he just, when it came to racing dirt bikes, that was it. It was training, eating good, and racing dirt bikes. Yeah, that was all he cared about, and it was just getting better. And I think,
probably never wavered from it either, right?
No,
that was
never.
And that's the thing, right? Like, everybody has good intentions. Like, I had great intentions. I get my butt kicked on the weekend, and I'm like, I'm gonna train harder.
Yeah,
I'm gonna focus. I'm gonna go pound motos, and then like I do it for a couple days, and then the next thing I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go out tonight, or,
right?
I'm gonna chill. I worked out hard enough the last 2 days. I'm just gonna hang out at home, right, and watch some movies. We're gonna go to Blockbuster and get a bag of Twizzlers and sit on the couch, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably the reason, and he probably had that instilled from his parents. Like you're saying, his parents were workaholics, so that probably carried over. And like, people are always a product of their parents, right?
Right.
So a lot of his success, it probably comes from his parents being the way that they are, right?
Right.
He saw how hard they worked to be successful and support him, and he's doing the same work that they put into their livelihood into what he wants to be his livelihood.
Right.
And I think a lot of kids nowadays, I mean, there are some kids that work really hard and try really hard, but a lot of them, they kind of take it for granted. They don't train, and then when the time comes, it's time to make it or break it, they take it kind of lackluster, and they don't end up becoming the rider they should become, or they have the potential to become. And I mean, I would say that happens to 99% of
easily.
people that race dirt bikes. A lot of people have potential, but they never blossom, or they never become a Ryan Dungey, right?
Right. And Ryan had his older brother Jade with him, and Jade was fast. Jade was in the A class when Ryan was in the B class, and Jade was real fast. So it's cool to have that have a sibling that's also a very decent rider. But Ryan was it was no BS all the time. It was we didn't go out, we didn't stay up late. He was in bed early, he was training hard. That was back when Lance Armstrong, everybody first started kind of really getting into road bike riding. And Ryan jumped on that. And even as an amateur, I mean, as a 16-year-old, the guy gave up high school, gave up his whole youth to race dirt bikes, and we were traveling the country. He's from Minnesota. They don't get to ride year round like we do here. And he would spend his time where he needed to be. He surrounded himself with people that were had his best of interests, and didn't get sucked into that I'm a pro motocrosser at 16.
Pull some chicks.
He wasn't like that. In fact, it was the exact opposite. When it was all business all the time, and I think that mindset is what really, on top of his really hard work. And, his natural ability. I mean, you have to have some sort of natural talent to get up to that point. But, it was just a total different mindset. I mean, you went homeschooled when you were 16 and stuff, but we also had a lot of fun. We'd go out, and it wasn't business all the time. And that, when I work for him, it was just business. Business is business. And he was never satisfied. He was always striving to get better. I remember going to the first big race that I did with the Dungeys was at World Minis in Las Vegas. And I think Ryan ended up setting the fastest time on his stock 450 over the whole weekend of everybody. And, and that was, Josh Hill was coming up, and, Austin Stroop and Kyle Cunningham and all those guys. And Ryan was the fastest. And he, we ended up winning a couple of championships that weekend and had a great time. And that point right there, I opened my eyes. I was like, oh my gosh, he's gonna be something good, And he's got the mindset from it. And then I remember just with Ryan, him kind of getting Cole Gress at Suzuki at the time. Nico Izzi was the number one. He was the number one for Suzuki. Everybody thought Nico was going to be the next big thing, and and rightfully so. Nico was crazy fast. And and Ryan was just kind of on the back burner. So the first team that Ryan ever kind of tested with at the time was WBR Suzuki. When, at the time, Ryan Morris was riding for him. Ryan Sipes was on the team. And we did like we came out and we tested with them. And, we had a good thing. And I just remember Michelle Dungey telling me, don't let Troy sign anything. We're holding out for that Factory Suzuki contract. We're holding out for it. And I was like, man, I'm just here to work on bikes.
Is this chain tight?
Yeah,
we're good.
Yeah,
you guys
So and then we ended up going to Vegas for the final round of racing that year, and I want to say it was like 2005 or 2006, maybe 2006, and Ryan went up and introduced himself to Roger DeCoster, and it was just really? He was just like, I'm Ryan Dungey, I'm going to ride for your team.
You know what? And speaking of that, that's the problem I see with a lot of the kids nowadays is the social media, right? They do a really good job of promoting themselves with social media, but they will not go call somebody. Like back when I was doing an arena cross, we didn't have social media. We had MySpace. Nobody advertised himself on MySpace. I don't even know if MySpace was around.
Yeah.
But I was doing arena cross. I had already started a career in law enforcement. I jumped out of it because I still wanted to race. And then we started the Buku Arena Cross. And I remember there was the MDK team.
Right.
And then in a roundabout way, I found out MDK was 45 minutes north of me.
Right.
So I was like, dude, I need some kind of help. I need good bikes. My bikes were okay, but I'm like, dude, they have good bikes.
They had Nick Way, and David Volleman.
And so I'm like, I want to do the best I can. So I picked up the phone, I called MDK, and I pretty much begged for a ride.
Right.
I was like, dude, I'm trying. Look, I made, I started off, I didn't make any mains. The second round, I made one main. Third round, I made all the mains. I'm like, I'm getting better. I'm like, I just want the good equipment.
Right.
And the problem I see with kids nowadays is they look really good on social media, but they're just posting stuff, waiting for someone to come to them.
Right.
And it's like, but they're like, they send texts, right? They don't call the person and talk to them. It's like, get the person on the phone, call and ask for what you want. Like, if you think you deserve it, like, you're not a beginner and you're not going to call Roger DeCoster and be like, hey, put me on Factory Suzuki, right? But if you're a pro and you're at that level, like you're making mains or you're really close to making mains and there's a team you want to ride for, go talk to the team.
Right.
Go talk to them and be like, hey, watch me.
Yeah.
Check me out. Like, I want to ride for you guys. If I make a main, consider me.
Yeah.
And the kids nowadays, they do really good with the social media presence, but they're just expecting them to, sit in their room and post stuff on social media and expect people to come.
Right.
You're not going to get anything unless you ask for it yourself. And like what you're saying with what Dungey did, he went up to Roger DeCoster and was like, hey, and I mean, that's how if you want something, go get it.
Yeah.
You can't in life. You cannot wait for something to come to you. It's never going to happen.
Right. And that was Ryan's thing was I'm going to introduce myself to him. I'm going to show him what I got. And I remember not too long after that, I wasn't around for the whole conversation. That was his business, not mine. But he ended up getting a test day with Suzuki. We went out to Competitive Edge, and I remember I was starstruck. Ricky Carmichael was out there, and Ryan was out there on his bike, or he was on a 250F, and doing great. And shortly after that, he was a factory rider, and I think just anybody who's ever spent any real time with Ryan, knows how hard his work ethic is. I mean, not only that, he's like the nicest guy ever.
Yeah.
He all the way up until he retired, he him and his parents still always had Supercross tickets for me, at the local round. And, and every time I walked up to him and said hi, it wasn't like, oh, hey, Matt, there you are. No, it was, it was like I never left. And that was the coolest thing and it just goes to show you that someone who didn't let the fame also go to his head. But you're talking a guy who I've never seen, obviously. That's the only superstar that I have any dealings with, and he was just the biggest thing I could say was his mindset was always there, his work ethic was always there, and his and it's one of the big things is you got to get starts in these things. And I remember that was one thing I asked him, like, hey, how are your starts? He was like, oh, I'm good on starts.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, like I've never had anybody tell me that before, because I remember. You remember Casey? Yeah. Casey was like the whole shot master for a while, and for us, we were lucky growing up in the era that we did when we had all the bounty hunters and stuff.
Daniel
like that.
Was pretty good too because he weighs like 110 pounds.
Yeah, Daniel. And Daniel got good starts too most of the time. But it was the local races we were able to have guys like Michael Lessie show up all the time, and And, I remember a couple times where Eric Sorby showed up to a couple rounds with Michael Young and stuff because the bounty hunters.
Pingree, I remember Pingree would show up at them. We get McGrath.
McGrath came to Salinas, right?
Yeah, and when we had the bounty hunters, and I really wish the local racing would get back to that. Cause,
Tyler Evans,
I talked to some of the kids that I'm, helping that are pro, and I'm like talking, and they're just spending so much money. And it's like, we had local races, those bounty hunters and those Top Guns, where you could walk away with $1,000, $2,000 on a Saturday night.
Yeah.
And then I remember one weekend I went to Red Bluff. I raced Red Bluff, went to Paso the next night, and I cleared over $10,000 in one weekend.
Right.
2 races. And I'm like, that is unheard of. I'm like, I don't even know if you could make that race in a Supercross main event.
Right.
Like, without the sponsorships. I don't know what the purse is, but I know it's not much.
Yeah, I think the 450 Pro purse is like $2,500 for first without sponsorships and stuff like that.
It's just crazy. So we grew up in a good time. And I remember at that time we were complaining about how the guys in the 90s made money because they were doing the Golden State and all the contingency money.
Yeah.
So hopefully the sport kind of goes back the other way to where it starts to grow again, because I remember the pro gates that we used to have, and then I remember at that time people telling us the pro gates they had in the 90s. So it's like, seems like we're kind of going backwards, but maybe it'll kind of turn around.
Yeah, I'm kind of, and motocross, it seems like it's taking a big turn towards everybody's kind of going to Florida now. California is not really the place anymore.
We've got no water.
Right, yeah. Our tracks are beat up and dusty and hard packed, but we still do a lot of the big races here.
Yeah.
But I think that what you see from these guys is, especially the top level guys, is that's all they're about, is just getting better and putting in the hard work and not afraid to go out there and commit themselves to something. When you want to, from my perspective on what I saw, granted this was a long time ago, it's not really the way it is now probably, but those guys were all business all the time. Nothing else mattered but getting better on their dirt bike. You had to go to the big races. You had to be at the big races around the fast guys, because those were the guys you were going to race at Loretta's and Ponca and all those. And if you're not going to be there with them every weekend, then you're not going to, and you just ride local all the time, you're never going to get, you're going to get to a certain point and then you're going to plateau.
Yeah.
And it's like, you have to spend the money. You have to go to Texas. You got to go to Florida. You got to get in with those guys. And
so they're going to make an electric fun mover so they can go across the states in an electric fun mover.
Gas at $7 a gallon isn't going to help. But
what do they say? You gotta start with $2 million to make $1 million. Across.
It's once Ryan got his, and I knew it, and I remember sitting there. I was working at Fault Line, our local shop at the time, and our Fox rep came in, and he was just like, "Hey, who's going to be the next big thing?" And I was like,
"Was that Steve?"
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, "Ryan Dungey." He's like, "No, I'm talking like Ricky Carmichael, James Stewart." I was like, "Ryan Dungey." I was like, just wait until he gets on a 450. I was like, "You think he's fast now on a 250? Wait till he gets on a 450."
Yep.
And and it was there. Ryan was always faster on his 450, but again, Ryan's technique was a lot, he wasn't out of control ever.
That's what I was just going to say. A lot of guys that are really good on 250s, they don't do as good on 450s because they override the bike. Right. So they're manhandling the bike everywhere, and then they get on a 450 and they don't know how to ride with the power, because you got the gyro effect of the motor, you got the weight of the bike.
Yeah.
And they get on it and they try to take that manhandling, and then they're a 450 guy that's in 10th, 11th place, right? They go from 2 championships in a row, and then now they can't break the top 10.
Right.
But his riding style, he was so technically sound that he was able to move up, which was actually a better riding style for the 450. More because a 250, in order to go fast on those, I think you do have to manhandle. You can't be a technical rider, super smooth. You want to be technical, but you got to manhandle those things a little bit. As to where the 450, you try to manhandle those things, they're going to fight back. And you're going to end up on your head, and you're going to end up hurt.
Right, and I think that's one of the reasons why Ryan, was another thing. Ryan was so good at working on just his body positioning, and he was always getting better. And I think either he knew like where the power was on the bike, and he could sense it, and he knew where he needed. And Ryan was always really good at telling me. He was really good at telling me, like, "Hey, this is where this is weird." Yeah. And I'd fix that, and then he'd be like, "Oh yeah, it's perfect now." And I'd be like, "Oh wow, he could actually feel what was going on with the bike. He was very in tune with it, and his style very much fit the 450 because he's so smooth." And you go listen to the track, and you'd be like, "Oh man, James Stewart's flying today. And then Ryan would have a faster time than you. You're like, dude, he didn't sound like he was moving. It was just because he was using the power right.
He's riding it right where he's supposed to.
Right, and he was very good in flowing his corners, and he was just so smooth. And he was one of those guys that you didn't see a lot of injuries from Ryan because he was always in control, and he was always, I saw him wreck a couple times pretty decent, but he popped right back up and keep going. I mean, he was just. He was a machine when it came to that kind of stuff, and I think a lot of people slept on him until he finally shut him up, so to speak. And